Have you had any experience with a consultant coming in and through that process help you change your mind about what the problem really was? And how did that work for you?
I think you've touched on this earlier, which is really coming to an understanding of what the problem is to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have that agreement, then it becomes very difficult to move forward in a substantive way. So I think absolutely, in our particular circumstance, there were a number of issues that I did not originally think were important or outstanding issues, but I think as they started to bring together these different inputs, it became very clear that, in fact, well, I'll just say it. So one of the points was, they asked, well, where is your plan for this? I said, well, we're working on a plan. Well, where is it now? Well, I'm developing it. He said, and the person looks at me and says, Christopher, just because it's in your head doesn't mean that it's a plan. And I said, well, it worked for me for high school. I mean, it was the second time through. They got me through high school the second time. But I think that's exactly it, which was really, okay, so the problem there is actually, it's not enough to presume for me to pretend that I own the plan as the board, as the staff leadership, but actually it needs to be shared, it needs to have input, it needs to have evaluation as part of that process. So that was an eye-opening moment for me, and it was very helpful.
And then sometimes those changes come from outside too. I mean, Sue, I think you could probably speak to that, where you start down a path of working on something and then external factors sort of change the scope or the focus of a consulting engagement. Do you want to?
Well, yes, it's all about money, So, right, we did engage with ESC to look at, again, this whole kind of, how can I redefine my job and move kind of out of the day-to-day direct and do some of the things that really make me happier than doing budgets and personnel. And unfortunately, as we were moving along that path, our funding was significantly impacted, and it just wasn't feasible at that point to do what we were sort of on the path to doing. I think the conversations were quite good, but still didn't turn out as I had hoped. I guess I actually, Kathy, wanted to respond to, it wasn't quite your question, but I thought it's where you were going. One of the things that I think I've learned in this process is I thought, for example, we needed a strategic plan. But I came as the client, and a board member didn't come with me to ESC as a client. So one of the things that I would like to think that I would do differently is that if the board and I think strategic planning is needed, then we both should engage a consultant. But it felt like I engaged the consultant, and then the board wasn't ever quite on board, if that makes sense. And it was a real struggle. That was just not a good relationship all the way around. So it wasn't the same as you're asking in terms of it's what I thought we needed. I think it was what we needed. What we didn't have is the right players at the beginning saying this is what we need, and we're agreeing to go forward. Mm-hmm. So we had an ED who was excited and a board that said, okay, we can add another half an hour to a meeting if that's what it takes. And that shouldn't have happened. We should have cleared that up from the beginning.
And the thing I was thinking about with regard to the external thing for you that you maybe don't see it the same way, but when this outside thing came and it became a financial thing, the focus of what you did was then shifting more towards how do we become more self-funding.
Right.
So instead of focusing so much on where you might go, or how you might face your job in the future, it became more about how you do that. So that's another way that, consulting engagements can sort of shift in the process, but still stayed sort of within the scope
mm-hmm.
of what it originally set out to be.
Were you lucky enough to have one consultant who was able to make that switch, or at that point?
No, I stayed with the same consultant.
You did?
It was
I could see that in some cases you would need to switch consultants,
right.
because it's a very different area.
But in that case, it was really just thinking out loud more, and that was very helpful.
So it turned more into a coaching kind of.
It was therapy. Well, I guess we don't say that, but it wasn't coaching, totally coaching. And because I was down a path, I had to kind of resolve that, nope, it's not my time yet to retire or that really was helpful, again, to have someone to talk that through with.
I thought there was great attention to detail, and the work was absolutely, it wasn't just finished on time, but there was also good follow-up to make sure that we were still dealing with some of the issues and addressing some of the open questions in the process, so that was very helpful.
Yeah, and so what I'm really asking is not so much, isn't ESC great, thank you.
10 out of 10.
Yeah, but how does that look, you know, so what is it specifically that people do that adds value over and above?
I think it's that sense of
Yeah.
engagement and partnership in the sense that, okay, the relationship may be ending, but there's, for now, but there's an understanding that maybe it continues in a different format, or that the person is still concerned with the issue.
Mhm.
They're still aware that the issue is ongoing and it's an important one to address.
So introducing you to other people, attention to detail, maintaining their interest in your organization, even though they may not be working for you.
Right, and I think, I mean, doing nonprofit work is pretty serious business, right? And I think you can tell whether the job got done or not, right? I think there's you don't have to think hard or look at hard numbers. I mean, you know there was a problem going in. Has that been solved? And that's usually, if people who are intimately connected with the organization, the ones who bring the consultants in, they know that yes, we finished the job or we're better off, and this is how. And we were able to say that. And I think at the end of the day, that's your metric, right? Was it finished?
What questions do you all have in the audience? I'm curious about, you know, based on your experience, what kinds of things you would like to know more about from a service provider's perspective.
Yeah, one thing, I think it was Christopher who said that, I'm not sure. It doesn't matter because it'd be interesting to have you all address this if you so choose. The comment was made about where does the advice of the consultant end and the work that ensues, I guess, from whatever conversation or action plan or whatever has been developed or is in the process of being developed, how that works, and is it tricky to decide who should do what? Or I just would like some information on how that all feels for you and how it works for you.
Well, I'd say I think it's a basic problem with consulting, or a basic challenge with consulting to address that, because I think from the nonprofit perspective, the goal is you want to get the work accomplished, not just the advice. We agree on what we need the solution to be. We actually would like the problem to be solved, because I think as you pointed out earlier, these problems are important enough that first of all, we're bringing in outside people to help. We realize we can't solve it ourselves. So there are probably long-standing issues that may deal with several different components that requires outside overview to address. So I think at that point when you bring in a consultant, there's an acknowledgement that this is really bigger than the organizational resources to start. So then when the consultant provides you with an action plan or a solution proposal and then says, here you go, congratulations, and then you're stuck with the same resources that you had before the conversation to now try to execute on that plan to solve the problem. I think that's the basic tension, and it's obviously through no fault of anyone's. I think that's just the basic challenge. Nonprofits are under-resourced. This consulting, which is fantastic, has its own limitations in terms of the amount of time and effort that we put into it. So I think it's that basic problem, and obviously at the very beginning being clear about this is what I'm going to do, and the consultants we work with were very clear and said, we're not going to provide you with a plan, we're going to provide you with a process to have a plan. And so that became very clear at the beginning for both the board and staff, so we understood at the end of it that we would have what we needed in order to actually finish a plan.